So here's our vintage vise that we used today to tie this woolly bugger. And that's the pattern we'll be showing. So yeah, I picked this up on eBay. It's cast iron. It probably weighs 30 pounds. You can see how messy my fly area is, unfortunately. But that's, I was like, hey, let's look at that. That looks really cool. And mostly I was getting it for decoration in my man cave, but for today I was like, hey, if I'm going to throw a woolly bugger in and tie a woolly bugger, let's go old school and let's go way back to this really cool looking antique fly tying vise. Here's our vintage vise here. You can see it's just C-clamped onto the table. Pretty simple, especially compared to what we're using these days to tie flies. So since we're tying today on this vintage vise, I thought, let's do a throwback and let's tie a kind of a vintage pattern here. And so we're going to go ahead and tie just a classic regular woolly bugger pattern. And we're just going to get our thread here secured to the hook, and I'll talk about the ingredients kind of as we go along. This will be my first time ever tying on this. I actually got this vise just for the fun of it, to maybe hang in a man cave at some point in time. So I've got my thread attached to my hook there, just where I want it. So we have a size 8. I think it's a 3X long, and I think it's like a 3/16 bead, gold bead on it. And for this fly, I'm not concerned at all about any sort of build-up, because we're going to put so much stuff on here. That's just not, plain and simply not going to be a concern. But the tails that we tie in is going to be marabou. And so this is a piece of olive. We're going to do this one in olive today. So I've got a piece of olive marabou, and I'm going to pull, I'm just going to stroke this towards the very top until I get those fibers kind of all sticking out like that there. And to an extent they're too good, and so we're actually going to break these off, and you can do that with your fingers. You can actually just come in with your fingers and break these off and make them look a little bit rougher, which will help us get that really nice woolly bugger kind of look going here. So that's all I'm doing, is I'm kind of ripping those perfect ends off to make some more imperfect ends that are looking more like that. Once I've done that, I'm actually going to wet this. I'll say that I did that in a cup of water, but we didn't. We're going to want that tail to be just a little bit shorter than the full length of the hook. So I'm going to go ahead and take that measurement, going to bring that marabou back. And we're going to go ahead and take a wrap or two here, and then we're just going to look and see where we are in terms of the length on this tail. I may want that just a hair longer, so I'm just going to pull on it a little bit, get a little bit of additional length there. Then I can crank right down on that tail that we've got there in place at this point. And I'll just, I'll tie forward a few wraps here. Just to secure the marabou feather down here onto my hook shank. And it's going to give us a little bit of bulk, which is fine. We're going to be tying on some chenille here in a minute. That's going to give us even a little bit more bulk than what this marabou is doing to us here. So I'm just going to take that back nearly to the back of the bead here, just so we have kind of some uniform thickness here. And we will just pull our marabou feather straight up like that, and we're just going to clip it off right there, just like that. We'll set our marabou aside. So now that I've got that marabou in place, I can just go ahead and go forward on it and make sure that that's all the way locked down, and we can take a pass back up and down just to get this, maybe a little bit tighter. Not that it's overly necessary. We're going to tie back up to about the middle of the shank on this hook here. So here we're going to go a little bit light. We're just going to use two strands of this crystal flash. And I'm going to tie it in right about the middle of the length here. And go ahead and just tie that in here just like so. And then we'll just kind of work our thread back towards the base here. And on the side closest to me, I've got 2 strands, and I try to keep them right up against the side of the hook closest to me. So I've got those in place, and now all I've really got to do is take these other 2, try to figure out how to navigate around this cast iron vise here. But those other 2, we'll just pull them back, and they're going to go back on the side of the hook closer to the lens. And we'll just tie them back to where we're going to have that body start. And from there, we can go ahead and grab our scissors, and we'll just trim that crystal flash off so it's about the same length as what our marabou is there. So we're basically going to end up with 2 pieces of crystal flash on either side of this fly. And let me see if I can do this in a way that you might be able to see it. But so there we go. So we've got our crystal flash in at this point. You can take a look here, and the funny thing is, and this isn't funny, but it kind of is I keep trying to rotate this. It doesn't. This thing is solid. Holy moly. I think it weighs like 25 pounds. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to tie in a piece of gold wire here. And that gold wire is just, it's going to make this fly a little bit more durable. And we're actually going to use it to secure a hackle as we start to tie this fly. And we'll go ahead and let that go ahead and go off the far side of the hook, 'cause that's where I usually like it. Although it's really weird with this big old honking lever on this ancient vise here. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I'm taking my body back to about where the barb of the hook would be, because now it's about time to get a little bit more serious in terms of our tying. So got that where I wanted. I've got my gold in. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to use some chenille. I don't tie with chenille very often, but this is just an olive that's going to go along with the theme here of the woolly bugger. And we're going to go ahead and just tie that in. We'll give our thread a counterclockwise turn, so the thread will jump back towards my thumb and forefinger better and help us secure that material down. So once we have that chenille kind of in place, just like that, I may take a few wraps back just to make sure I've got it so it'll start the body right back where I want that body to start, which is right where that part of that hook would have been. So I've got my chenille in place, and I'm just going to take wraps forward to behind the eye of the hook or behind the bead here. I don't want to crowd that bead too much, so you'll see as I bring the chenille up, we're going to not necessarily just clump it all together around the bead. This pattern can also be tied by putting some lead on here first to give it a little bit of extra weight if you want it to get it down in the water. The bead will do a lot of that for us, but you could also add some lead here. So now I've got this olive piece of chenille, and we're just going to start taking kind of touching wraps, moving up the shank of the hook, one after the other, so we get a pretty even body width or depth or whatever you want to call it. If we tie one right on top of the other, then we're going to start getting much bulkier. So we're just going to take this and we're going to take it up to right behind the bead, kind of like I mentioned before, and I'm just going to pull my chenille this way. My thread is back towards the back end of the hook, so these wraps are going over the top of this chenille that we've just tied in. And I'll just take a few thread wraps to secure it from behind, and then I'm going to take my chenille and pull it the other way and wrap my thread right behind the bead here. And at this point, our chenille should be nice and secure. So we're going to come on in with our scissors, and we're going to, I can't rotate. Oh, wow, it's so weird. I'm just going to cut that piece of chenille off grab our next ingredient, and the next ingredient is going to be a hackle. And you're going to want a fairly good sized one, just because this is a very big hook with a big gap. And I'm going to want to tie this with the shiny side facing me. And you can see that I've already prepped it a little bit by pulling the fibers off the bottom here. So at this point, we're just going to secure our hackle here right behind the bead. Just going to hold that kind of at an angle there, and go ahead and tie that in there. It's like that. I may pull on the stem a little bit to get that in a little bit tighter. And I'm going to take a few thread wraps on behind it, and then I'm going to take the stem and pull it backwards. And I'm going to put in a few thread wraps there as well. And that's just going to help us make sure that this thing is locked into place. And at this point, I'm very confident that this is locked into place. So I'm going to come in with my scissors and try as close as I possibly can to cut the stem off of this piece of hackle. So this is going to be kind of interesting. I didn't start out doing woolly buggers this way, but in watching others, I've kind of learned, and it's pretty cool. The gold wire in the back is actually going to capture our hackle when we get back to the tail here, rather than using a thread to capture that hackle. So I'm going to want to make sure I have at least a couple of really good wraps right behind the bead, just like that. And then I'm just going to try to take evenly spaced wraps, moving back down the length of this hook, moving down towards the tail. You don't want to pull it too hard or you're going to break your hackle, but if you're too soft, it's not going to stand up or it's going to come unwound. I am going to want to watch out for that hook point that I can see as I get closer here towards the end, because I really don't want to hit it. That is the fast track to breaking your hackle, is to do that. And so there we go. I've got my hackle coming up over. Now I'm going to just grab my silver wire or gold wire here, and I'm going to wrap it across the stem of that piece of hackle. I've still got it in my hand and holding it tight just so that it doesn't come loose. I'm going to go ahead and pull that fairly tight to keep that in place. And then we're just going to kind of jiggle this gold wire a little bit back and forth as we kind of move up the body of the fly here. And that will just help us not trap quite so many of those hackle fibers. You can kind of see the gold through here, but that's really not the biggest purpose. The biggest purpose of this gold wire is that it's going to secure all of that hackle moving all the way up this fly. As well as that initial point of securing back there at the tail. So we're still just working our way up the fly. Not quite as perfect as I would want it, but hey, it's a woolly bugger and it's a vintage vise. So yeah, here we go. Now we're getting up here a little bit closer. Probably 1 or 2 more wraps is all we're going to put in here. And now I've got my gold coming right out from behind the bead here. I'm going to take a couple of wraps with my gold going this way, my thread going towards the bend of the hook, trying not to trap too many of these fibers in here. So these wraps are going behind or over the top of my gold wire. From here, I'm going to take that gold wire and I'm going to pull it back a little bit, and we're going to take a few wraps here as well, just to kind of secure that piece of gold wire. So there we go. We've got our gold wire kind of locked into place, and we'll just do the old helicopter, put some tension on that, pulling up on it while I rock it back and forth, which will heat up that metal with the tension, and then it will eventually break. This is a pretty heavy wire, so it may take it a moment, but it will give up eventually, and it just did. I'm going to now come back in here and clean up the tail, because I still have my hackle attached there. We don't want it there. So I actually still have a balance of hackle that I could use for another fly, so I'll just set that aside here. And with that all done, we're just going to kind of sweep the hackles back with our fingers a little bit. Just trying to not get them too, we don't want to get them too trapped. And I don't mind if they're laying back a little bit. We'll just take a few wraps this way. I can see I've got some on the bottom, and if, holy crud, if I had a rotating vise, I would probably be trying to take care of those right now. But since I don't, it's really hard to see those, other than a faint outline of something that's going to bother me. So here we go. I'm just going to now just grab my whip finisher. We'll be finishing up our woolly bugger, our olive woolly bugger here. Let's take 4 or 5 thread wraps here. And I probably put a speck of cement on those thread wraps. I just, you know, help keep that from those thread wraps from coming unwound. And then from here I can just come on in and trim out my thread. And we're free and clear. See if I can get under there and see those couple of fibers that are going to bother me. They're still probably going to look bad, but there you go. Here's my lever. We'll just, I think, push it forward, and it lightens, it opens up my little cool jaws there, spits out my fly. We got ourselves a woolly bugger the old school way.